Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our morning coffee time for Tuesday, June the 9th. So we have some light rain here in the gorge, and it's kind of beautiful, actually. I know I must sound like a Pollyanna. If it's sunny, it's beautiful. If it's raining, it's beautiful. But I enjoy most weather, and it's beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to have the stillness of being in one place and to watch the seasons passing. And probably one of the most treasured experiences of my life was a year of solitude I spent up at Birken Monastery. I think it was 2014, and just spending almost all of my time in my hut on the edge of the marsh, watching the cycles of the sun and the moon and the stars and the animals and the seasons. Most of us don't have the experience of that kind of stability and stillness anymore. And I've had similar experiences in Thailand when I was a young monk. And it's something I wish everyone could experience. But those are difficult conditions to come by for many people. But this time of the pandemic enhances something of that experience. Like, I haven't left the monastery other than for a little stroll in the woods that neighbor the monastery since late March. And I enjoy the regularity of it and the stillness and noticing the subtle changes. So yesterday was a big change, transitions, as everyone knows. Venerable Kantako and Ajahn Sudanto took off this morning. So we had a van come up from Baiguri. Nice volunteer and friend of the monastery, Skip, offered to drive the monks up from Baiguri. And they arrived while we were having our evening meditation last night. And so after that finished, we had a chance to greet them and get them settled and oriented, and everybody got a rest. And then early this morning, there were some preparations for the monks who've been living here to head down to Baiguri today. So I said, enjoy your day driving through the landscape of the pandemic. I wanted to say witnessing the zombie apocalypse, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So let's see, 86 people. So I think most everybody who wants to be here is here. And I see the sign that people can hear me and people can see me. So that's great. I even see there's a question there. Something I was reflecting on a little bit yesterday, conversation I had with one of our stewards who comes by once a week to help us out with one little thing, triggered this. Just thinking about our orientation to this endeavor of changing our mind. And I think there's something about maybe our cultural conditioning that I certainly experienced and acts as a bit of an obstacle to people. We're a bit too patient and permissive, and maybe sometimes think too long term when it comes to this endeavor to sort of overcome suffering. Or the way I think of it is get yourself free. There's a question and sometimes even some confusion about when stuck in an unskillful state of mind or when one finds oneself suffering, especially the thornier, stickier forms of it. There's been some interaction, there's some story, there's something that one's worried about. We're not very good about giving ourselves permission just to change the mind, or said another way, just to drop it and get unstuck and to move on. And kind of my reading, and also based on some of the encouragements I've heard some of my teachers and friends giving people, maybe most strongly Ajahn Sona, you should give yourself permission to overcome suffering as quickly as possible. Drop it like a hot potato. Get yourself unstuck. And I have this kind of model in thinking about suffering, the hindrances, and even unskillful states of mind as impeding the kind of free flowing state that we long for in our life. There's a sense of uncomplicated, free and flowing sensations that come, I think, along with a happy life and a skillful life. And, if we use this as an analogy, unwholesome, unskillful states of mind are things that we get stuck on. And there's various challenges that the world throws up. There's various challenges our conditioning throws up. And we get hooked when we get stuck. And some of the stories that we tell ourselves and some of the stories that we're being told by others, I think is not very good. There's some sort of sense that we have to earn our way out of this. Like, this is telling me something. I need to figure it out. I need to learn something from this before I can let it go. And I think a lot of this might have to do with just the position that some of the ethics and ideologies imported into our culture from Western psychology were a little bit maybe over-inclined, in the sense that if we're suffering, then this must be the real me, or this must be where the real problem lies, and I need to sort of slow down and own it and unpack it, feel it. And, in some sense, like, that might be the best you can do. But I think we're really missing out if we don't give ourselves permission just to do whatever skillful thing we can to drop it, to unhook ourselves, to get unstuck, and to move on. Karma will take care of itself. If there's more to be resolved, then you will meet that, but meet it in the present moment rather than, sort of thinking that somehow you have to process everything. The model of right effort is really quite encouraging to address things straightforward and forthright, and to free yourself, to bring them to resolve, or, like, in some sense, the Buddha says to do away with it. Like, he's using very strong language, and it seems very clearly sort of focused on freeing yourself as soon as you can to move on to more skillful states of mind, like literally knocking it out, replacing an unskillful thought with a skillful thought can be it. And I remember early on, reading something about the various temperaments, and in particular, I was focusing on, I forget what I was focusing on. I think I was reading Visuddhimagga around the charitas, or the personality types and temperaments, and I remember reading about some encouragement to sort of create a habit of being a joyful person to counteract various things, and just thinking, wow, that's not really a strong habit in me. That's not really me. And then at some point it kind of dawned on me how I'm creating this sense of self and this sort of story, which is kind of limiting. And even though on some level I understand and I have faith in our ability to sort of change the mind, and that self and these emotional habits that we have are conditioned, the delusion that's still there kind of feels like there's a person that ought to be, and somehow is a little bit resolved and stuck, if you could, on accepting various habits at some level, and doesn't really incline to this kind of deeper possibility of just practicing changing your mind. And when one discovers that they're in the grips of a bad habit, or in the grips of an unskillful thought or emotion, or in the grip of suffering, that my inclination, at least, and I think maybe other people share this, is to not really give themselves enough permission just to drop it and move on, and then keep dedicating oneself to building, developing the path and strengthening sort of skillful habits of mind, which in the end will have this effect. Like, nothing's wasted, you know. There's tremendous merit, and you are retraining the mind, and you are building the conditions for the future non-arising and the weakening of those habits. And in particular, I was thinking this morning in my meditation just about this experience of reading about the idea of becoming somebody who cultivates the habit of joy, and setting aside that sort of story of like, oh, well, that's not really me. That's not who I am. I've met people in my life who seem to be born on the sunny side, and their mind inclines in that way. And I disidentify with that type of personality. And then I remember taking this up as a bit of practice, just to remind myself to incline the mind to arousing joy in wholesome and skillful ways. And with a sense of faith that with practice and with the cultivation of the path, that becomes something that's eminently kind of possible for one. So, and it ties in with this kind of contemplation of overcoming the hindrances. What is it that we are seeking to experience? And with the cessation of the hindrances, we should be closer, and it should be easier and more natural for the mind to incline in that way. And I think if our practice is strong and the mind has a great deal of balance or something, it does enable us to fairly easily just to drop whatever it is that we're hung up on. Some sense of frustration, some movement towards irritation, anger, some movement towards sadness and depression. Witnessing and knowing with discrimination, like, this is unskillful, this is unwholesome, this is not to my benefit, this does not support my endeavor to cultivate the path, one just drops it and instead turns to something skillful. So I see Stan has posted the question here: could you provide some suggestions for skillful ways of cultivating joy? Yeah. Well, one I think that is very nice is Buddha Dhamma Sangha, like recollection of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And I remember it was around the same time that I started doing some reflection around that as a way to cultivate joy. In particular, I found the recollection of the Buddha very nice, and I took something from the Thai translation of the recollection of the Buddha that I found really meaningful. And for some reason, I really I liked the fact that it was in Thai, and I'd been learning Thai and understood the meaning. And in Thai, it's Pu Ru, Pu Dun, Pu Bek Ban. And Pu Ru is the knower, and just thinking about it in the most profound sense of how the Buddha awakens to this kind of knowing of the mind and knowing of the truth of the Dhamma in a way that overturns suffering, and then how that is a purified definition of what we think of the kind of awareness that we're trying to cultivate in our practice. So just imagine that with faith and the perfection of that. Puru, like being the knower, like really knowing yourself, and really knowing and seeing Dhamma in this very clear, unconfused, lucid way that alleviates all suffering. Like one of the images that's in the sutta is like somebody who would bring light into a place that was dark and it would illuminate it. So to think about it in that way. Puru. And just, the fact that somebody could achieve that and have the Barmi to bring that into the world and teach others, and that it's existed for as long as it has, helping who knows how many people. Then Pu Dun is like the awaken, like to Dun is to like open or awaken. And then Berk Ban, my understanding of it at the time, like they use the word ban for like a flower opening in Thailand. And so I just built a reflection and some imagery around that. And I would kind of meditate on that to enhance a sense of faith and joy. So that's one way. The other way is I would reflect on the keeping of my precepts and just having made it through the day without breaking any precepts and living in a way that's blameless and free from remorse. And that's something that you find a lot in the suttas. The Buddha's talking about the value of ethics and good sila as being a natural source of joy, contentment and gratitude. So that can be a really wonderful thing, like reflecting on contentment and gratitude. And then one of my favorite, mudita. So I have so many wonderful friends and teachers, and I'm in contact with so many wonderful people through this holy life that I'm living. And just to witness the goodness of these people, like, I'm a daily observer to acts of generosity and kindness and stillness and clarity and wisdom and incredible forms of giving, both by the monastics and my teachers and by the laity. And just seeing that as something that I can delight in, not take for granted, and not diminish in any way, but yet rather to delight in that, to take joy in that. And even in a dark, confusing time, there's no shortage of people doing good and noble and generous and kind things that we can give attention to and delight in. And so, those are kind of a few ideas about cultivating joy, but also like you can do it in a more elemental and maybe simple way too. So just walking around thinking of the value of joy, you can remind yourself to arouse that and experience the emotion and hold that in the heart, hold that in the mind, nurture that. And I do that with several things. Sometimes as I'm moving through my day, the mind feels a little bit flat. The mind feels a little bit scattered. You can just recollect peace and stillness, even in movement. You don't necessarily need to stop. And then there's this, the mind moves towards that, and one experiences that. And every time we do that, we're strengthening the recollection of the value of that, and we're strengthening our aptitude to be connected and in touch with that. If there's some barriers or obstacles or inability, then we're learning about that. And if the mind feels far from happiness and joy, it's good to know. Like, wow, this is really hard. I can't get there. Why is that? And when I really see the mind is beset by hindrances and they're not easy to overcome, then that stimulates a sense of heedfulness and an enhanced motivation to maybe reshuffle my priorities for the day, or even for the next little bit of time, to try to be a bit more careful to build good conditions so that I can get back to suffering less. So, hey, I see an old friend here in the chat. Wonderful to see. Okay, well, I saw a question early on, so I'm going to scroll up and run through the chat here and see if I can find that. Where was it? Samrit. Ajahn, how to deal with deep regret, guilt, and remorse for trusting someone who betrayed and humiliated you? Regret, guilt, remorse. Well, you might start off by just forgiving yourself. You were who you were in that moment, and you could reflect. You couldn't have reacted in any other way because you didn't. you reacted in a way where you trusted somebody maybe in a way you shouldn't have, and then they acted in a way where you now feel betrayed and humiliated. So just accept that this has kind of happened, and forgive yourself for making whatever choices that you made. There's nothing you can do about it now. The past is a memory. You can't go back and fix it. And if we reflect on not even through the lens of right effort, you should free yourself from that. And one way to free yourself is just to reflect, like, there's nothing you can do about it. It's past. And it's not worth suffering over. And engendering some equanimity, some acceptance, some forgiveness might help one free oneself from the sting of thinking that you could have done better, you should have done better, you should have known. If it happened, the conditions weren't there for it happening in the way that you're imagining it, that might be supporting those negative emotions. So, and then you might as well extend the forgiveness to the other person, to kind of free yourself from being hung up on this, and the proclivity to feel anger, ill will towards that person. And then, I guess you can learn what you learn from it. Like, maybe you might need to change your relationship to that person, or be a bit more careful in the future on your own part. So, it can be very nice. Especially when we're having difficulty with somebody, we minimize how unfree people are to be who we would want them to be. And we minimize how much it is that others suffer with their unskillful habits or their unskillful actions. So just in the same way that you might enhance a sense of forgiveness or your own part in it, or trusting somebody you shouldn't have, or whatever, it's good to reflect. If they could be somebody different, they would have been in that moment in the past. So, of course, there's a potential for people to change. But as students of change and people eager to change ourselves in positive ways, we know how difficult that is. And that can help foster engendering some more skillful states of mind. Man, we got to get rid of the baggage of the past. There's so much. We need that energy and we need that space to kind of engage in this practice. And you just can't go back and fix the past. You might as well make peace with it so that you can move on. Okay, maybe this will be the last one here. George, good morning. Please speak to loving kindness towards oneself. Well, it's important to include yourself. It's very important to include yourself in the practice of loving kindness, because this too is a being deserving of friendliness and loving kindness, and not something that should be thought should be the object of ill will. So, and many styles and some of the refrains or language that's used in developing loving kindness starts with self and then moves outwards. So this sutta that we chant quite often, the sort of suffusion with divine abidings, which introduces this notion of sort of spreading loving kindness kind of in the one corner, the second corner, the third quarter, the fourth quarter, above, below, around, everywhere. I really like that, because the experience of mind or consciousness seems located here in this thing that we identify with. And so that's also a way to start with the self and then expand the notion of what it is that we're generating loving kindness and goodwill for. If you have a hard time generating loving kindness for oneself, then sometimes a practice like that is really good, because it's not so much bound up with characters, me, my loved ones, the neutral people, people that I don't like or consider my enemies. So that's one way of stepping out of the whole framing of characters or whatnot. And in some of the forms of loving kindness meditation, it's very much focused on different kind of characters. So, that's one thing. But I also sort of find it a little bit easier to sort of develop loving kindness to oneself if you just reflect on the fact that we're liable to all this kind of suffering that we're on some level so much in touch with, and it's almost like stepping outside of yourself to try to relate to this conscious experience as in a more objective way, and then generating goodwill and the wish for ease, for safety and happiness and all the blessings of life for this being. So, and I think it gets easier the better the more skillful we become in stepping outside of always having to frame our experience through the lens of self and through the lens of identity. So in my better moments, I don't even think of this as just a human body. I mean, there's all kinds of viruses and there's all kinds of stuff going on here. So when I direct loving kindness to this little chunk of the universe, I don't think of it as just directing goodwill and loving kindness to me, Ajahn Sudanto, whoever that is. So, okay, well, we are upon the ending for today's coffee time, and I hear the rain starting back up today. So I'm going to move on with my day. Good morning, friends, and hope to see you all either at our evening puja or tomorrow morning. So Ajahn Krunadamo and Venerable Rakito arrived safely, and we're going to get them settled in here. So, and wish you all well, and have a joyous day, and don't waste any time suffering. If you find yourself getting stuck, see if you can just shake it off and move on, at least for a little bit. Okay, bye, friends.